Hi there, I'm Kylie Mowbray Allen from Hello Media.
And I'm Jenny Walk from Elephant in the Room Consulting, and you're tuning into Bite-Sized Business Life Podcast, the show that helps business owners get clarity and insight to grow their dream business.
Whether you're launching, ready to scale, or figuring out what's next, we discuss the nitty-gritty, the hard bits, the opportunities, and the behind the scenes, and share how we've grown our own companies and helped others do the same.
We're glad you're here. Bite-Sized Business Life Podcast, the show that helps small business owners get clarity and insight to grow their dream business. Good morning, Kylie. How are you today on this fine Monday morning?
I'm great. Thanks, Jenny. And good morning to you. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. I've had a great weekend. Looking forward to a great chat today, which I'm very excited about.
Well, I am too, but my word, I'm a little discombobulated, maybe is the word. I have been doing a bunch of research because I feel like it's really important that I understand it from both sides, both points of view, obviously. And this morning I joined a Facebook group, which is all about the no's, so I could get a little bit of a feeling for it. And I just feel like crying reading some of the stuff. I think there's a lot of information out there that's very confusing for people.
There is. And for those who aren't sure what we're talking about the Voice to Parliament referendum that is due on the 14th of October this year. So all Australian citizens are required to vote, as it's a formal election, election style thing. And so we have to vote on the 14th of October as to whether or not the Voice campaign goes forward or not.
Yes, indeed. So I think, Jenny, my first question would be to you then. Well, firstly, to let everybody know you're an Indigenous woman, Bundjalung
Yes,
country.
I'm a Bundjalung woman from Northern Rivers, New South Wales, and very proudly so. Yeah.
So you're speaking with authority here. So what I'm noticing a lot of people saying is, but have you spoken with any Indigenous people? Have you spoken to an elder? Because none of them want it. So clearly that is not the case. And so perhaps we could just start with exactly what is this and why do you believe it's needed?
So thank you for the opportunity. I think I wrote a blog last week, which was just a really simple kind of, I guess, an opinion piece to say that we just need to kind of stop catastrophizing the world when it comes to the voice and referendum for both the yeses and the nos, to be honest. Essentially what the Voice to Parliament is, it came out of the Uluru Statement of the Heart some years ago. And I think to some extent its connection with the Uluru Statement of the Heart has actually made it a little bit more confusing for people. So if we just step away from the historical piece and just talk about what the Voice to Parliament actually is and what we're asking people to vote on the 14th of October. And this is a fact, this is just factual pieces, right? My job is not to try and sway or influence in whether people want to vote yes or people want to vote no. It's entirely up to them, as it should be. It should be an individual decision. And I think this is the key piece, right? Individuals have the right to choose. It's a wonderful thing that we have in this country, that we have choice and agency over our decisions. So importantly, I want people to recognize that this is a personal choice. And if you're making a personal choice, then it's beholden on you to actually understand the case as you're doing, both yes and no, so that when you make that vote on October 14, you actually know why you're choosing yes, and you know why you're choosing no. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is, to be honest. I would rather have an honest, open, and transparent referendum where people have understanding and knowledge, not just scuttlebutt and fake news and lots of scaremongering, which is what's happening. So I think I just want to start with that piece to start with. So essentially, the Voice to Parliament referendum is asking for a constitutional amendment. So a constitutional amendment can only be done through a referendum. So the parliaments, the two houses of parliament, can make laws any day of the week by passing it through both houses of parliament. We call that legislation. And so that can be changed at the whims of government. And we've seen that over in Western Australia at the moment, where we had the Western Australian Cultural Heritage Laws finally enacted last year, the change, and then revoked less than 10 months later after them being actually enacted. So legislation can change with the will of the government, essentially. What a constitutional reform does is it actually enshrines the opportunity to make laws and other things into a constitution. So we're not actually making legislation from this. It's actually the opportunity and the position to do so. So I'm not a lawyer. This is a layman's version of this, okay? I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a native title lawyer. This is just my understanding of the constitutional process, right? So please be mindful that I'm not coming this from a position of any technical capability, right? It's just my personal understanding and my research into this. So the proposed constitutional amendments ask for three things. The first thing is that there shall be a body, then this is reading from the statement, is there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. That's the first thing we're voting for. The second thing is that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So be very mindful of that, to make representations. So that's to put their case forward to government about matters relating to us, not everyone else, not anything else, simply matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that could be in the way that we're managed, in the way that laws are made on behalf of or for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's representations by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to government on matters relating to us. And then the third piece is that the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws in respect to matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. So basically, it's now saying we're enshrining in the Constitution the opportunity for the Parliament, for government that is, to then make laws in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's what we're voting for, those three things. So if we break down each of those things, the question you need to ask is, what do they mean to you? And what does this mean for us as a nation? It's not asking us to, you're not giving us any powers, and this is all we're voting on. What a lot of the No campaign is talking around is that there's no detail about what happens when this change is made. And that is true for every piece of the Constitution. We have a Constitution that was enshrined in 1901. And at the time, we didn't have, 24/7 news cycles and internet and social media and everything else going on, with people being able to campaign as to why certain things should or should not have been in the Constitution. But at the time, we also didn't have the voice to be included in the Constitution this way. So really what you're voting on are those three things. You cannot vote in this, and it's not asking you to, and they cannot actually in any way have the level of detail people are saying is needed, because that's up to Parliament. That's up to the government. That's up to the people that we voted through federal and state elections to make the decision about what the legislation and any laws look like. What we're doing is providing the opportunity for that to exist. That's all we're voting on. The detail comes out through Parliament. And the reality of it is, it might take a year, it might take 5 years, it might take a decade, it might take longer. But that's where the Parliament actually then works on our behalf to say, okay, now that we've been enshrined, this voice is enshrined, what does it look like? And that's where we start to have the community discussions, and that's where we can see what the detail looks like. But it's not for us to put that detail into this piece. This is simply making three changes to the Constitution, to one, enshrine a voice called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, to allow the government to allow that voice to make representations to government on matters relating to us, that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and for the Parliament to then be able to make laws in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That is what you're voting on only. There's no veto power listed in there. It doesn't talk about any obligations for them to listen. It doesn't talk about what the bureaucracy, any of that, none of that's in there. It's just talking about the opportunity for that to exist in terms of legislations and laws on behalf of us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and thank you so much for that clarity, because just simplifying it down to those three things, it's very, very clear what is happening. And I'll be honest, I can't even believe that this happened. Yeah, it just seems a little bit late, but hey, better late than never, right? So let's then talk about treaty. I'm seeing a lot of things being bandied about treaty. There was obviously the treaty in New Zealand, where I'm from, so I had a very different experience of growing up than what people did in Australia, obviously, without a treaty. So my understanding is that what's being asked for is, first of all, voice, second would be treaty, third is truth. So can you talk a little bit about treaty and what that would mean for you, for example? I know you're not speaking on behalf of anyone else, but in your instance as an Indigenous woman.
So happy to talk of those two things, but I just want to make sure that you are not voting for treaty when you vote for the voice to Parliament on the 14th of October.
Absolutely.
You are not voting for this. It's a very separate conversation. So if we think about what a treaty is, the historical relevance of a treaty is that it's about recognising the sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in those areas. So that's what the treaty is calling for. It's a recognition that this country has never been ceded to the colonizers or the, whatever word you want to use there, that the treaty is about recognizing sovereignty. And there's layers of treaty because there are 500 plus nations and descendants of those nations that exist in Australia. So the development of a treaty at a state level or at a community level is a very complex issue because we're asking either from a state perspective to recognize all the peoples of this land and all the different nations as having sovereignty. And then that has connections with native title and Aboriginal Land Acts in some of the other states. So there's a relationship between treaty and some of those other existing legislations. What it's really around saying, at its heart, though, what we're saying with treaty is recognize that we're the first people, recognize that there's a connection with that in relation to sovereignty, and then talk about how we work together to maintain, the connection and maintain the relationship going forward, recognizing us as the sovereign party, essentially. So it's not around, we don't have any treaties here in Australia, although there's a process. Queensland has a treaty process and every other state has a treaty process at the moment. But some of the challenges are around the different locations that we have and the different connections that people have to the country and who exists, I guess, to speak for that country. And so part of the challenge that we see with treaty is then who is the person that speaks on behalf of Queensland? There is no one person, right? So do we create multiple treaties or do we create one treaty that recognises all the parties? And then what does that look like? So treaty is an incredibly complex decision. There is a government department set up for treaty because they recognise the complexity and then the need for community engagement and consultation in order to make it work. So that's a very long process. The difference, I think, with other nations like Canada and also obviously in New Zealand and Aotearoa is that the treaty came very early on in the relationship. Not in all cases, because in Canada they're still doing treaties. There's some of the 5 core treaties, but there's still treaties being established now. Thank you. There's still treaties that are being developed now. But in Australia, we're 200 years down the track, right? The cart's already bolted. The cart and the horse are kind of gone. And now we're trying to put those things back together to develop what that might look like. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But and like you said, though, treaty isn't a done thing. This is about the voice. So treaty is literally removed from it. I just thought it was really important that people understood what that even was, what it might look like. Now, I want to read you something. So there's been a bunch of comments, which is just, as I mentioned earlier, blowing my mind. And we really welcome anybody that's listening in on this as a live stream to be jumping in the comments and asking any questions that you might have or sharing your thoughts. We're super open to it. But I want you to, I want to just read out this one that I read, which just, this is really was the heart of what made me feel so sad about it. So they said, this is why we must vote no to this racist voice nonsense to save Australia from racism, bureaucratic elitism, and communism. Unity, not division. Communism. So when words like that are being bandied about, that we're going to become a communist nation, if the voice happened, what? Jenny, share your thoughts around that.
Amusement is what comes to mind, to be perfectly honest. To me, I guess what the reality is, we already have a racist society, and anyone who thinks otherwise is living under a rock. Let's face it. And that's not just about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Racism exists as a human condition in the globe. It exists in the population. The difference is people can hold racist views of superiority and think that they're better than others. And that's really where racism comes from a fear of the unknown, and that there's a separation between us and them, and that kind of pure blood mentality that we used to see way back when. And that exists in a lot of people. When it becomes hurtful and weaponized is when people are trying to project their views of racism and superiority on others. And that's where we see some of the conversations coming from, is this belief structure of less than or greater than. That exists anyway, right? And I think we have to recognize as humans, as people, that the racism discussion needs to be parked. This has nothing to do with racism. Racism is someone's personal belief structure being imposed on other people's. This is not what we're trying to do. This is not what The Voice is about. The Voice is about recognition and an opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to speak to their representatives in government, to speak to Parliament about the impact of laws that could be made, of the impact of some of the really positive intentional policies. We could argue in the era of the 50s and 60s when the Protection Act and all the other acts were developed from the late 1800s through to mid to late 70s. Those acts were set up not to cause harm. They believed it was the right thing to do. The intention was true. The impact, as we've seen today, was division, was separation, was segregation, was essentially Australia's apartheid. And so the impact is what we want to talk to people about. The impact is what The Voice will allow us to do, to share. This is a great idea. I like where you're going with this, but have you thought of the impact on the people on the ground? Because the reality is people in Parliament live in an ivory tower and don't understand what the impact of their policies can be. And we've seen that through through COVID. We've seen that through a range of other policies that were initiated based on the belief that they were the right thing to do. But the right thing to do can still have incredibly negative consequences. And without The Voice, that's the voice that we're trying to share, an understanding of the impact. And so we can represent our peoples to government, where we haven't had representation since the nation was colonized.
And really, how on earth is the Constitution weakened by just introducing an advisory committee? Like, it just
correct, and
that makes sense to me.
100%. And this idea of saying that there'll be weakening, it's not. The idea of The Voice is not to provide a third layer of government, and nor will it. As I said, this is simply an opportunity. The reality, if we wanted to talk about reality, we could vote yes to The Voice, and then no agreement is made about what that looks like. And it sits in, parliamentary limbo forever as people politic around what it looks like, who should be on it, how is it structured, what is it going to do, all those things. But without the opportunity, we will never have The Voice. And that's what this is simply doing is, and I understand there is concern around, and as constitutional lawyers from both sides talking around the negative and the positive impacts of this, but let's just take a step back. The Voice will not have, and does not at the moment, it does not, we're not voting on The Voice having parliamentary powers, veto powers, legislative powers. What the constitutional change is around saying that we can make representations on behalf of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, people do that every day. There are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who politic for both sides of government, who are paid politicians. Their job is to prosecute the argument of the government of the day or the opposition of the day. They are paid politicians, people. So the views that you're presenting may not actually be their own, but they're choosing because it's their profession. In the same way as a consultant, the same way as a coach, whoever you are advising, you're advising the parliament of the day, right? So your choice is sometimes those voices that you're hearing very loud around this on both sides may be representing the government because that's their role. And we all play a role in this. The question, though, as an individual, as an Aboriginal person, is it going to affect me on a day-to-day basis? Is it going to change the way that I run my company? Is it going to change my identity? No, it's not. But what it does give me an opportunity to do is to share my voice and the understanding of impact of laws about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to the government, to Parliament, through whatever the voice mechanism looks like. I'm a realist, though. We're talking, I would imagine, many, many years before the Voice is actually stood up once we say yes. And if we say yes, then the Parliament can debate these arguments for us. And we can make representations as Australian people to our members of Parliament and say what we think this looks like. All Australians can make those representations about what they want the Voice to look like. but we have to have the opportunity for the debate. And to talk about racism and communism and fear-mongering, to me, is really just taking away from what the opportunity is, and instead it's making it about politics. So if we put aside politics,
the opportunity that it is,
yeah,
that's exactly what it is. So Jenny, there's been this graphic circulating around the socials that's just been coming at me constantly, and it's a black octopus, many tentacles. It says the voice, it's got these super, super evil eyes on it. And then each tentacle has another reason why you need to vote no. So for example, I just want to read you a few of them. One of them is higher taxes. Another one is high court challenges, abolish Australia Day, treaties, constitution chaos, and reparation and land title claims. So I'm seeing this a lot around abolish Australia Day. I think there's just so much distress around that as well, for goodness sakes.
I'd like to just talk about the Australia Day piece if we can, because I know there's a lot of people. It's a very passionate piece, right? And I understand that, but I guess I'm of two minds on Australia Day, Invasion Day. It is a recognition of the start of one of the greatest wars in history, right? We recognize that. It's not saying that this is the day that celebrates us as a united country, because it was actually the beginning of a division. It was the beginning of this war. It was the beginning of this discussion. So Australia Day, Invasion Day has such a powerful emotion for all sides of the argument. And there's not just two, there's multiple sides of the discussion around Australia Day. But even if the conversation became around what Australia Day may or may not be, the argument or the discussion to change the date isn't to abolish it. It's asking and inviting the country to recognize its growth and its history and its maturity in this discussion. And I'm going to use that word again, maturity. This is a time for us to be mature about this and have adult conversations. Not to have conversations like you're in the schoolyard with the schoolyard bully. This is not time for those conversations. It's time to have considered discussions. And that's what makes us a great country, isn't it? Is the fact that we can debate and discuss. This is not communism. If this was communism, we couldn't have these conversations. We would not be allowed to have these conversations, people. So the idea about Australia Day is simply about recognizing the impact, again, what's that word, impact that day has on many people. And it's not removing the day, it's recognizing that day has an impact in different ways and will impact people differently. So be respectful of other people's opinions. In the same way, if you wish to vote no, but do it respectfully. Don't disrespect others and you won't be disrespected either. That's a human condition, right? That's got nothing to do with race. What about,
thank you for sharing that. Absolutely love
I get a little bit
saying.
Excited about silly things like that.
No, I appreciate it. I really do. I want to see what you think about this one. Here's another comment. They already have representatives in the government from Indigenous people, and they get more handouts than any white person in this country. Most of the Indigenous people want the no vote because it protects them all. Once they open this can of worms, they will all be worse off. How about that one?
I do love global statements like they and all. I do appreciate those.
And as we said at the very beginning, you as an Indigenous woman is speaking on behalf of yourself here. You know,
I'm not speaking on behalf of any other Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person. I have no right to do that. I'm speaking as an individual. For me, it's about opportunity to recognize. That's all it is. It's an opportunity to have a different discussion. And yes, we as Aboriginal people have representation in the government, but it's still very small. Why is that? Let's consider the policies of the past that prevented us doing all the things that essentially, in the word that we don't like to talk about, that we have in Australia, which is white privilege. And comments like that come from a position of white privilege. And I don't mean that to weaponize, and I'm not saying that as a way for people to be shameful of that. It is, we all have privilege to live in Australia. We are incredibly privileged to be here as humans, right? In this country, in this time. However, when you start to say things like, and make false accusations and make false statements around, we get more handouts than anybody else. I haven't received handouts from anybody else. I don't get handouts. I work for the money and the whatever I have, I work for. What they may be talking about is some of the education initiatives, some of the health initiatives are instigated to try and close the gap that still exists between mortality, well-being, health, education, access to employment, that still exists as a result of policies that were only changed to the latest in the 70s. So these policies are not historical policies that no longer impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. They're policies that have impacted our health and well-being as a community as a whole from the day the English landed here. Now, the reality is the conversation that we have living in Australia is always from the narrative of the victor. And we have to remember that, right? Where this conversation, this privilege, this white privilege that comes from the voice of the victor. Because we have been the minority since colonization, since invasion. We have remained the minority. Yet if we consider the way that we treat other minorities in this country, we do not treat them with the same disrespect that we treat Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the whole. Of course, there are pockets of racism. We talked about that earlier. But if we think about the conversation, and again, let's put our big boy and girl pants on, people, and let's talk about this respectfully, and let's talk about the truth and the facts, and remove the emotion, and remove the scuttlebutt, and remove all the, the need to create an emotional response so it triggers people. Fear triggers hate, fear triggers racism, and fear triggers negative response. Let's remove the fear.
Absolutely, Jenny. So one more thing I'd like to bring up, which is, unfortunately, I can't read it word for word because I did not copy it and put it in my notes. Maybe because I was so shocked, but it was about color of your skin. And so not yours personally, but just people saying, we're Indigenous, but then it was literally saying, but they're whiter than I am. And I remember having this conversation with one of the amazing business owners that was at your retreat week before last. And we were talking about that and how that felt for her. Again, not trying to speak on behalf, she wasn't speaking on behalf of everyone, but how it felt for her as an Indigenous woman, being asked, are you half caste? Are you this? Are you quarter? Are you whatever? So there was a lot of that kind of discussion going on in amongst this Facebook stuff I was reading and Instagram stuff. So what would you like to share anything around that?
Yes, having spent much of my childhood being bullied because I was Aboriginal, despite being a paler Aboriginal, I still got called Blackie as a kid. I still got called Abo. I still got called horrible names worse than that in primary school, as did my sisters. I still had people ask me whether my mother was my nanny and not my mother, and how could she be my mother when she's Black and I'm not? For us, identity is about our blood. Identity is not about the color of our skin. For me, identity is about my blood. And my blood, it runs very deep and runs very loyal and becomes part of who I am, right? It is how we used to back, before the colonizers came here. It's how we defined who we could marry, where we could go. Our country, our land, our connection was defined by our blood. Now, if you're telling me because my skin is pale and my blood is not Aboriginal, I defy that statement from purely a scientific perspective. I'm the daughter of an incredibly proud Bundjalung woman who is the daughter of an incredibly proud Bundjalung man. And my grandparents be before them. Now, my blood runs deep. I cannot change my blood. I can get a fake tan if it makes people feel better about me being Aboriginal. I can wear darker makeup if it makes you feel better about me being Aboriginal. But it doesn't change my identity and it doesn't change how I feel about being Aboriginal. And I think that's the perspective. It's other people's views and their narrow-minded views. And we go back to the old, it's a meme that's floated around for years. If all of you who drink coffee and it's a latte coffee is still a coffee, even though it's got more milk than coffee. You still call it a coffee, but we call it a latte. Does it make it any less coffee? No, it's still coffee. So whether you drink tea, whether you drink coffee, whatever the meme you want to follow on, it doesn't change who I am. And if somebody else chooses to define me by the color of my skin, that is about them, that is not about me. And I would believe that most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would feel the same. I can't speak for anybody else. I can only speak for me. But for me, it's about my identity, not about theirs.
So beautifully said, and I wish I could just reach through that screen and give you a big hug. How you stay so calm, and even before when you were saying, look, even if the yes goes through, or even if the voice goes through, it could be years and years and years and years and years before anything actually happens. And how you're not just infuriated with the unfairness of it all, but you'd go mad, wouldn't you, if you anyway. So what I'd like to say to you is,
I think, Kylie, to that point, if I may, there's a lot of arguments around the no vote, like that's, and there are a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people talking and saying the no vote because they personally don't believe it's the way to go. That's their personal choice, right? For me, any step to recognise Aboriginal people in the Constitution in more ways, to me, is a step forward. What comes out of that is us as a nation to decide. It's not just Aboriginal people who will decide what the outcome of this. If the vote goes through, the decisions that follow are made by all, for all. It's not made by just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's the first thing. Will it deliver meaningful change? Who knows? Who knows? When the Constitution was developed in 1901, did anyone think, is this going to create meaningful change? No. Yeah. It talked about laws and taxes and how we structure our government. It wasn't about individuals. It wasn't about impact on humans. It was about the government structure and framework, how we live. And this may not make meaningful change, but you know what? I'd like to see it try. I'd like to have the opportunity to make meaningful change. And that's what this is about. The treaty, yes, treaty should be prioritised, and it is being prioritised by lots of governments around Australia. And the state governments and the federal government are looking at ways to prioritise and manage treaty and work through treaty. But you know what? This is just one piece of the puzzle. This is not the whole picture. And I think we have to stop looking at things in isolation and see them as they're parts of a whole.
So with regards to that piece of the puzzle, and as you said already, there's many Indigenous people really consciously choosing no, and that's their piece. But what do you think's behind that?
Look, so having interestingly enough, I haven't spoken to any Aboriginal people who are voting no, and maybe that's just the circle of people I'm around or those who want to share it with me. I think their campaign is one of two things. One, it's from fear. It's they're worried, or they're latching onto that emotional kind of argument around it. Or it could be that connection to the fact that they don't feel it's going to make the meaningful change that they want to see in the world, and they want to find a different way to do it. So I can't speak to why someone would choose no, because to me, it's about, do I have the detail? No, you don't. So what? Does it really matter if we don't know the detail? We go to legislation, I said, is created, but what it does, it's just opportunity. And I think they're missing the point of what this is about. And there's a lot of discussions and alignments brought into between this and the 67 referendum, where there wasn't a substantive no campaign, but there also wasn't social media. It was done in a very specific way. And I think we can't draw parallels anymore to that campaign or to any other referendums, because we have so few in Australia, because they're notoriously difficult, because we're asking to change something in the Constitution that can only then be changed back by another referendum. And so I understand them, but that, to me, that's driven from a sense of fear and the unknown. Whereas I live in a world of opportunity. I see the world one of opportunity. That's what we are as a country. That's what we've been known across the world as, a land of opportunity, right? That's all this is. It's an opportunity to just have a different conversation. And we should be brave enough as a country and as a society to have that conversation and to embark on this debate and to share this journey together. It's not about us and them. It's not about saying it has to be about every minority. This is about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the first peoples, the oldest living culture in the world. Be proud of that. Rather than isolating and separating, be proud of every non-Indigenous person's in Australia connection to the oldest living peoples of the world. That's all this is.
I just have so much awe and love for what you say and how you say it and how eloquently you explain it. Like, I know for me, there's just so much more clarity. And I want to mention Michelle has been writing in the comments here, voice equals culturally safe, community-driven advocacy. And then she said, I agree, just conduct yourself respectfully. Some people are being really unkind, and it's just so true, isn't it? And I'm thinking, crikey, we've got another month to go or more than. So I just don't want it to ramp up to be something so incredibly unpleasant. But then you, Jenny, you're the one saying everybody should be able to vote, whichever way they want to choose, just to make sure that they do it mindfully and they know what they're actually voting for.
I think we get caught up in the narratives of other people. And I guess I'd like to leave it on this is, we often from a politics perspective, we end up becoming, supporters of the politics of our parents. And you see that, you see it in a lot of communities where you are Catholic because your parents are Catholic, you're Protestant because your parents were Protestant, you are this because of your parents and your grandparents and your lineage, right? And I think this is the one time where rather than just following the herd and saying, I'm going to vote yes because my parents vote yes, or I'm going to vote no because my friends vote no, I urge you, I encourage you, in fact, I implore you to actually say, let me read all the arguments. Let me read both sides. Take some time. There's some great work through most of the universities. If you type in yes and no campaigns, most of the universities are putting out information. And, it's a great place. There are academic, there are education institutions about the different sides of the cases, both yes and both no. Read them and listen and say, does it make sense? Is that true to me? Does that make sense to me? Ask yourself why you're choosing how you're voting. And if it's because your friends are, it's because you don't want to kind of go against the grain, or you just want to follow the herd, maybe it's time to actually make your own way, take your own stand and make your own decision, and not be guided and not be persuaded by other arguments. This is a fundamental individual choice, and you have the power for that. And you should take that. And if you throw that away and just follow the herd and look at the memes and go, yes, I'm going to vote no because the meme is funny and I think it's scaring me and I'm fearful, then you're losing the one piece that makes this country actually phenomenal: agency over your decisions. And if you don't want to make your own choice, maybe that's a reflection you need to have on yourself, and rather than actually derail the arguments for others.
You are an outstanding human being, Jenny, and I am forever grateful to know you and to be in your space.
That's very kind.
Thank you. No, thank you for being happy to talk about this today. I know it's a little bit away from our regular bite-sized business chats, but you are a business owner, and therefore it is something that is affecting you. It's affecting all of us. I'm overwhelmed by all the stuff going on with socials, and it's like I just really felt if we had this opportunity to chat, if it can help even one person to not necessarily vote a different way, but to feel empowered to go out and just have a bit more knowledge about it, then that's a win. So thank you so much, Jenny. I really do appreciate this.
And I do want to reiterate, this is my personal view, right? I'm not talking on behalf of anyone else. This is my belief structure. This is how I choose to see the world in this time, in this space, about this discussion. And so, and that's really important, because I know people, it's quite possible when we get off this call and we go look at the socials, there'll be people making comments about my choice and my decisions and why I'm saying this. But please recognize this is my belief and my way of voting, and I'm sharing that publicly because I think it's important to do so. But it's not designed to politic or fear or create any groundswell other than to encourage you to listen, learn, and take time to build your own knowledge, because ultimately you have to be comfortable with the decision that you choose, whether it's yes or whether it's no. I've got really good friends who might turn around and say, actually, we've decided to vote no, and that's not going to change my love for them or my connection to them. It's a personal choice. And I think we just have
You're such a better human than me. You are so much better a person than me. I am very much based on how things make me feel. And no, we cannot. Oh, that was very clear through the whole pandemic.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, thank you for the opportunity to talk and share. It's actually been a privilege to be able to share and to be able to have conversations with you like this. When we could do what most people do, is stick their head in the sand and turn up on the day and go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But you know what? Just own your decisions. That's all I'm asking people to do, is be considerate, be kind, be respectful, and choose. Make a choice. Don't just go to the default.
Beautifully said. Let's repeat that. Be considerate, be kind, be respectful, and make your choice informed.
Correct.
Rather than just throwing a dice on the day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Kylie.
We're going to chat about SEO for beginners, and I have one phenomenal way that you can all change the way that you show up in a search so that it's your business over and over and over. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that.
I'm so excited about that too. I cannot wait to go back to conversations around business and growth. And I really hope that this has helped people at least take some time to be empowered, do some research, and go forward. If people want to reach out, feel free. But Kylie, if we want to reach out to learn more about what you're doing before we talk about SEO next week, how do we do that?
Jump on to hellomedia.team and you'll be directed to all the places. Jenny, how can people find your blog? Obviously, we'll put a link to it in the comments, but I know that people will want to find your website and then be able to read that blog.
So elephantintheroomau.com is the website. You can go to our blogs under on our website. So elephantintheroomau.com. You can also find us on socials at elephantintheroomau.
Beautiful. Love it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining in. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Biteside Business Life podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you so much, Kylie. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.
Thanks everyone. See you soon. Have a great week.